Welcome back to the Manor. Julian McBain here, and we are back on migration. And hey, I managed to do it during daytime, which actually for a Saturday recording is not uncommon for me, although my luck recently has not been terrific. Especially since the time of day usually means it's nighttime in Entropia universe. So that's interesting. How's thing I think is a little bit deep to talk about, but before we get started, if you're new to the channel, welcome to the Manor. Please take a moment and subscribe down below. We are on the road to 13 million subscribers, one subscription at a time, so make sure you subscribe. Also, please consider going to patreon.com/JulianMcBain if you want to support my work. If you do, you'll get exclusive content. I might be doing my August video next weekend. The last 2 weekends have been incredibly busy, but I'm going to aim to get my August exclusive done next weekend, so if you want access to that video and the videos I have made prior, please consider becoming a member. Okay. Today I want to talk about death. And I want to talk about death because with the pandemic waning, and I know that you got the variants popping up, but with the pandemic waning, there's a lot of funerals that are going on that had to be put off due to the pandemic, and I actually just got back from one. And I just wanted to kind of reflect upon death as a concept, because it's not an easy thing to think about, right? And I think it really warrants inspection. Because it is one of the two inevitabilities of life. And one of the other inevitability of life is one I think we can overcome over time. You know, they say the two inevitabilities of life are death and taxes, and I actually think that there's a method for us to be able to retire taxes. I'm not going to go into that. You can check out my old Julian McBain Show podcast series if you want to see that. I've gone through that. But death is the one thing we can't avoid. Like, we can get away from it for a while, right? We can kind of hide from it. We can out health it for a long period of time. We've even figured out how to extend life, but not indefinitely. And I don't think we ever will. I think that there is an absolute finitude to our life. At some point we have to die. It's part of the cycle. I don't know what the hell is with this hear you, but I'm just going to take it out. Thank you. And people don't like talking about death, and who can blame them? Death is the unknown. It's a scary place to be. And it's something that people, I think, they walk through their life terrified of it, or they just pretend to not care about it at all. Like, you know, if it happens, it happens, and that's all there is. And I think that's almost worse, right? Fear of death is bad. Ignoring death is worse. And I think that there is a need for people to really grapple with death. And in fact, that's one of the things that they teach you. Like, I'm a Freemason, and that's something that you have to review. And I'm not going to go into that because it gets into the secrets, but we understand that we are traveling the road of life to our deaths. And it can come in any number of ways. You know, we could die of old age. We could die in a car accident. We could die of a disease. We could die from from electric shock. You could get struck by lightning, as infrequent as it is. My great-grandfather actually got struck by lightning and survived. I'm actually pretty sure that my great-grandfather might have known the Grim Reaper personally, because I'm pretty sure the Grim Reaper just trolled him non-stop. And here's what I mean by that. My great-grandfather got struck by lightning putting up storm windows, survived. He stormed the beaches of Omaha, the Omaha Beach, on D-Day. Got shot, was left for dead. As they were cleaning up the dead off the beaches, a couple of British, for lack of a better term, dead collectors, right, picked him up and somehow figured out he was still alive. So that's two. And then I don't know if it was on that beach or if it was in Africa during the same war. A poisonous snake crawled over him and bit the guy next to him. That's three. And then he survived 3 rounds with cancer. 3. The 4th one finally took him. And we firmly believe the only reason that the 4th round finally took him is because he had suffered from some serious mental decline. Which, I mean, after all the shit he's been through, who wouldn't go through mental decline? At some point, you're just like, you know what? Fuck it, I'm done. But just, I understand that you have to anthropomorphize an action. I do believe that the Grim Reaper is an entity as such, right? The Reaper is an entity as such, even if it's a mental entity that only exists in the mind of human beings. Because there's a certain amount of reality to the things we come up with. There's a certain dimensional reality to the things that we can come up with in the mind, especially if we personify them. And so, for instance, in the anime, the Irregular Art Magic High School, I think they really personified it well. They really kind of nailed it down where, you know, if you believe in string theory or M theory, there's say 10 dimensions. I know that there are arguments over whether there's 10, 11, maybe even 12, but for the sake of this argument, there's 10 dimensions. And one of those dimensions is the idea. Because you've got length, you've got width, you've got depth or height, you've got time. Time is a dimension. It's one that we have a much harder time quantifying, no pun intended. It is much harder to quantify time as a dimension, but we do recognize it as a functioning dimension, and it's a dimension we move across. But it's the only dimension we can only move across in one direction to our knowledge. And you can speed it up. Like, we actually have evidence that you can speed time up. We have, there was an astronaut, I think he's Russian, and he spent the most time in space, and because of the speed he was in space, he actually moved forward in time several seconds total over the course of his life. So very incrementally, because of course we're not moving at the speed of light, but we can do it. We have the evidence of this. And so, you know, that basically proved general relativity, and that was the idea that the closer you get to the speed of light, the more time dilation occurs and the further into the future you go, which is why, you know, even if we could go, you know, from here to the moon in 15 seconds at the speed of light, by the time we get there, basically the same amount of time would have passed on Earth as would have passed had we not gone the speed of light. It would have not passed for us. And I think they did a great job illustrating this in the book series that's related to Ender's Game. But but I digress. But so we personify things, and if we accept that we live in a 10-dimensional plane, and we accept that means that one of those dimensions is almost assuredly the dimension of the mental plane where ideas come into focus. And I think this is evidenced also, and evidence, not proof, and you can't measure something that we don't necessarily have the proof. We can't guarantee is the actual case, but it's a hypothesis, so work with me. I think this is evidenced by several people having a similar idea at the same time. A good expression of this is the existence of dragons in almost every single culture that ever came up uniformly, and they all look very, very similar with cultures that never had contact with each other. Like, when Europe finally made contact with China, both agreed there was a such thing as a dragon. Okay? The dragons looked drastically different from, well, not drastically, but significantly different, materially different from each other. But the concept of dragon was the same. And the generalized appearance of dragon was the same. So you've got that baseline, and it's in the idea. And theoretically, we could possibly, if we could ever figure out how to transcend that or to break through into the idea, we could quite possibly transmit ideas through the idea to each other. And therefore, because of that, you have this conceptualization of death. And I mean, we all use the stereotypical Reaper figure, and that's the hooded shadow, often with a death's head, so a skull for a face or a mask, or perhaps a face you can't see at all, and carrying a scythe in a robe. But I don't necessarily think that's the. I mean, that's a good cultural depiction of the Reaper, but I don't know that that's the best literal depiction of the Reaper. If there were to be a physical personification of Death himself, and I do believe that if Death were personified, it would probably be a masculine figure, because Death is the ultimate expression of order, because nothing can escape it. But maybe that's not true, because it can also Death is also born from chaos. It's the unknown. It's the ultimate unknown. But it's the firm limit to life is death. And so I believe that the male personification of death is accurate. And just like in a lot of comic series, you have life and death. And life is personified by a woman, which I think is extremely appropriate, and death is personified by a man. And the one, my favorite one, is that death and life have loved each other forever. Life keeps making things for death, and death keeps them forever. And I think that personification of the two concepts of life and death are truth, not necessarily a hard fact, right? It's not objective truth. We're talking about philosophical truth, because there is truth in philosophy. There is truth in the underlying structures that create our society. These are the foundational structures that create the house of life that we build upon it. Now, I believe that the ultimate foundation is faith, but that's me. But these philosophical structures would be built upon that faith. That's how I see it. Now, if you don't have a particular faith, or if you don't, you aren't particularly religious, or you're an atheist or whatever, fair enough. But you can't escape the fact that there is a philosophical foundation to the world and the life that you live, no matter what that philosophy is, whether it's religious or not, whether it's whatever. There is a philosophical foundation to the world you live in, and the blocks, the stone blocks that make that foundation, are built in those. The bricks are the philosophies that you hold. And so those philosophical truths are what I'm going after with that. But death is an interesting thing, because it's the one thing we can never possibly understand in full. Right? We can't possibly transcend death and see what happens to the mind, to the consciousness after death. It's just not possible. At least not so far as I can see, because even though there are those who have died and been resuscitated, their brains did not die. So their consciousness never truly completely left their bodies, let's say. And I mean, you got the out-of-body experiences and the people who quote-unquote saw the light, which I think is completely bunk. If they died and they saw the light, it was the lamp that was over their faces as the doctors worked to revive them. But there have been stories, and I think this is very interesting. People who die, and they're resuscitated. So they're not dead long enough to suffer brain death or even significant brain damage. Inevitably experience some sort of transcendent... They have some sort of transcendent experience. And the only thing I can think of when I hear those stories, because they're very, very consistent, it reminds me of stories that people tell me when they've been on an acid trip. To a certain extent, not as extreme. But here's how it plays out. And I'm gonna completely screw up the details, but here's the way that I remember the story being told, and this is third hand, so just work with me here. It's like you're out on an ocean, but the ocean is darkness. But you can see. And as you walk out, you feel yourself melding and dissolving into the ocean. But it's not painful. It's like a feeling of warmth and of correctness. And so if you're a Star Trek fan, the only thing I can think of that would be analogous to it is in Deep Space Nine, when the changelings melt into their lake together. And I have to wonder if that is the consciousness blending back into the idea. Or perhaps there is a greater consciousness that we all return to when we pass away. And so that's a really, really strange thing, because we We really don't know. And they say that, there's always been an idea that if humans can transcend our physical forms, we become one giant collected consciousness. And I'm not sure how I feel about that idea, because by its nature, that means that for whatever reason, it's always assumed that humans by our nature would eventually end up in some sort of collective situation. And to me, that's very dehumanizing, because that means that we are nothing but ants. Because ants don't have free will or individual consciousness. They are living machines controlled by their queen. And the queen has a form of consciousness, a rudimentary form of consciousness, of sorts, intelligent enough to direct her brood to do what she wants them to, at least. But I don't think that would be accurate. I think that if anything, it would be like the changelings, where we all meld together and we can see, hear, and feel, but we retain our individuality throughout all of it. And maybe death is, and I have my own opinions of what happens, after death, but let's just assume for a moment that this is accurate. And let's secularize it just for the sake of argument. Imagine if, when you meld into it, you can see and hear the thoughts of everyone around you that is willing to volunteer those thoughts. And you spend eternity debating things and talking about things and sharing stories and sharing life experiences, almost as if it's a gigantic spiritual database. And I use spiritual only because I don't have a better word for it, because we don't understand what it is. And generally, if we don't understand what it is, it gets thrown into the realm of the spiritual, which I know isn't a terrific way to do things, but it functions for our purpose. And I find that very interesting. I think that, the reason we fear death is because we're afraid of the unknown. And we should be. That's a natural inclination. It's built into our brains. And it's built into our brains because at one time we were prey. We're now an apex predator, but one time in our evolutionary cycle, we were prey. We evolved. If you look back at the tables, we evolved from a form of tree-born monkey. And so, tree-born, or there's an arboreal monkey, and the thing about arboreal monkeys is they, generally speaking, aren't predators. They're prey. And from that common ancestor, the only two other monkeys who are also arboreal monkeys to this day, they're actually apes. So let's say an arboreal ape, but let's not get too technical here, because, I'm a YouTube personality and amateur philosopher, not a biologist. Are the two species of the pan genus, the chimpanzee and the bonobo, which, if you take the two of them and put them together, you basically get all of the basic biological traits of a human. Chimpanzees are extremely tribal. They have very complex social structures. They have politics. They have a rudimentary form of politics, although it's extremely rudimentary and tribal. It's not like what we view as politics. It's much more basic than that. They have social structures, and they kiss babies to gain power. That's a thing that they do. They kiss babies and they take care of other chimps' babies to gain power, and that was actually quite revelationary to me, because it's like, wait a second, that's what our politicians do. Because if they don't, their rivals will kill them, and they are very brutal in their warfare. They will rip each other apart, and a single chimpanzee could do the same thing to a human. They are much stronger than we are. They're like 2 or 3 times stronger than we are, which that blew my mind too, because a chimpanzee is like, half our size. But they are incredibly strong. And so, so the prey circuit. So we got this prey circuit, which is why we react the way we do to adversity oftentimes. We shrink from it. That's a very prey-like mode of being. When adversity comes, you hide. And that is something we have had to spend thousands of years trying to figure out how to overcome. And so the fear of death is very, very natural, but I think that it's misplaced. And that doesn't mean that we should all, just go out and try to experience it right away. No, that's a stupid idea. But the idea is that it is just another step in life. And my Mehua Kwan just made level 6. And I do believe we should be prepared for it. We should be mentally prepared. But we should not, and to a certain extent, we should embrace the fact that maybe not embrace it. That's the wrong word for it. We should accept it and understand it as best we can. And I know for a fact that when my time is coming, I will probably fight it tooth and nail until the last minute. And the reason for that is because that is my nature. Because I've been close. When I was a kid, I stood out not realizing the temperature. I was in ROTC, so I was in a uniform. The uniform chosen for that day on its own was not sufficient to protect against the cold, and I was too dumb to put on the cold weather gear that morning because, I thought, no, I'll be in a car the whole time. The little thin London jacket will be plenty for the 10 minutes I might be outside. Circumstances changed. There was a miscommunication, and I ended up standing out there for close to an hour, anywhere between 30 minutes and an hour. I don't really have a good sense of the time because I basically lost consciousness. And I say basically because I still managed to walk. So what I did was the school is at the bottom of a hill, and a friend's mother picked me and him up, and then we lived within a quarter mile of each other, so she would just take me home and then go home themselves. And I was at the top of the hill, which is about 150 feet up. Okay, the walk itself is under a quarter mile, but it's 150 feet in elevation above the school. I believe it's that much. I know it's substantial. It might only be 100. It might only be 100. Maybe that's a little much. It might only be 100 feet, but it's still it's enough to where I could easily see long distance over the school and behind it. So I'm standing up there and I'm waiting, and I don't know it's like 0 degrees out, right? It kind of prickles and it hurts a little bit because when it's 0 degrees out, the air hurts your face. That's just a fact of life. And so I'm waiting, and I'm waiting, and I'm waiting, and I get lost in my thoughts. And next thing I know, I am on the floor in my school. And what I was told happened was I walked into the school and sat on a heat register that was active. So I am probably suffering from some form of hypothermia, and then literally thermal shocked myself by sitting on top of a heater. That's the stupidest thing to do. You do not want to do that. You want to gradually heat someone up over time. And both of those things, by the way, can be fatal. Of course, everyone knows hypothermia can be fatal, but thermal shock will kill you. And yeah, so I haven't come as close as a lot of people have, but I've brushed it, let's say. And I realize that I am not one to just give up the proverbial ghost. I will fight it tooth and nail until the day comes. But I accept that it will come. And at some point, I will have to shake death's hand and accept his victory. So, all right, guys, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please like, share, and subscribe down below. We are on the road to 13 million subscribers, one subscription at a time, so make sure you subscribe. And as always, I really appreciate the support, and we will see you in the next one.